So are we ready to get started?
Yeah.
Yeah? Thank you. Thank you, Jason. You got enthusiasm. So I just want to say a couple quick things before we start with Eli today. And you're welcome to play a few more notes before you start. So master classes, I think sometimes a lot of students get it in their heads that a master class is an opportunity to try to come up on stage or wherever it may be and play perfectly or play as well as they possibly can. And of course, it's always good to have the goal to play as well as you can, but I want us to think about this master class today in a much more sort of playful way. This is an opportunity for us to explore some new concepts together, to learn and grow. I'm not expecting anybody to come up on stage and play anything, absolutely flawlessly, if such a thing even exists. I want you to come here. This is a chance for us to have fun, to be in the sandbox with one another, to discover some maybe new things you hadn't thought about or think about things in a different way. And I want this all to be applicable for everybody out there so that we're all learning together. So that is the spirit in which this master class will be held today. And with that, Eli, why don't you tell everybody what you're going to play?
So I'll be playing two movements from Alyssa Morris's Collision Etudes, which is a set of 6 etudes, all inspired by paintings by American artists. Mm-hmm. These two movements are both inspired by paintings by Georgia O'Keeffe. The first one is Jimson Weed, and the second one is Autumn Leaves.
So we will hold our applause until you play both etudes. there's so many wonderful things for us to dig into here, and there are so many wonderful things that just happened. I was running through my mind thinking about where I wanted to start. I've got some kind of oboe technique things I want to work on, a few artistic things, and those are all obviously very connected symbiotically with one another. But my first question for you is, did you feel different just now playing that than you did when you played these in your lessons for me? And if so, how and or why?
I mean,
because it was a different experience on my end, for sure. So I experienced something different. I perceived a higher degree of openness in your energy as a performer, a higher degree of vulnerability, a higher degree of fearlessness. You felt different to me. You felt more confident just now than you did when you played this in your lessons. So I want to analyze that and figure out why. What is the difference? What's going on up here that's affecting the whole? So was your experience any different?
I think so.
Do you think you come alive when you're in a performance setting in a way?
I think the atmosphere helped, but I think also after I played some things for you, we talked about stage presence and keeping my body language in the zone as well as just playing. That helped me focus on.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, I saw a pretty big difference just in 2 days. That's really impressive. The reason I wanted to ask about this, first and foremost, remember, as musicians, we're many things, right? We're artists, we're philosophers, we're comedians, we're athletes, and we're scientists as well, right? So there is a very scientific component to our craft. You need to, whenever you're playing, whether you're practicing or performing, you need to obviously strive to be in the moment and be in the flow and letting go. But at the same time, there's a part of your consciousness that always needs to be aware of what's going on, aware of your body, aware of things that are tripping you up, aware of thoughts that may be new or different thoughts or patterns, just developing self-awareness in your playing. And for me, one thing that really helps with that is trying my best to eliminate the divide between practicing and performing. And there's a lot of philosophies out there, and actually Professor Schaefer and I have had many wonderful conversations about this over the years. But my philosophy, and this has really helped me immensely, is that there is really no difference between practicing and performing, right? Now, of course, if I'm on my own and working on something, I'm going to be really doing my due diligence and taking the time to play things very slowly and carefully and not leave any stone unturned and make sure I'm really doing that element of the work, what we kind of call woodshedding, which is not my favorite terminology, but yes, when we're doing the woodshedding. But still, even if I'm just playing a long tone, or if I'm just playing 4 notes that are part of a larger passage, just to work on the fluidity and the connectivity and the cleanliness, I'm still always going to be infusing those with the same performance energy and selflessness and generosity of spirit that I intend to do on stage. I want there to be as little difference between performance and practicing as possible, so that when I get on stage, when all that extra adrenaline appears and those thoughts, at least in my experience, run rampant, my body, my mind, my soul, they know what to do because I've been doing it every day, right? So I wanted to ask you if you felt a difference being up here versus like playing for me in your lesson, because what I perceived was a greater degree of fearlessness and openness, and whatever brought you there, I want you to strive to live in that state at all times when you're practicing. So that is just how you are. There's no differentiation. You don't go to the practice room and you've got your phone out. I'm not saying you do this, but I know a lot of us do this. We have our phone out. We hack away at something. We look at our social media. We hack away at something. No. You stand up. You play. You start with whatever you're going to start with. For me, a lot of times slow scales, long tones, arpeggios, maybe a little bit of improvising melodies, stuff like that. Just getting in touch with my body, my breath, my support, which is the first thing we're going to work on. and playing all of those things as if I'm playing them out into the world, not in whatever space I happen to be in. I'm always projecting my artistic will, no matter what I'm playing. And I saw that in you just now, and I want to see that in you every day, every time you play, because it was really beautiful. Now, oboe stuff. So support. This is one of the first things I noticed watching you play. And I hear it first, right from the beginning. You have a beautiful sound, and on that reed, I think this is the same reed you played in your lesson, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, it has a really nice chiaroscuro, it sounds really warm, it doesn't have a lot of edge or spread to it. Actually, what I tend to hunger for when you're playing a little more is ring, scintillating qualities, the lighter side of the chiaroscuro. Your tone really has a lot of nice cushion to it. I'd love to hear more ring. We were working on that a little bit in your lesson. And I think that really starts, first and foremost, in the support. Where are you supporting the tone from? Where does the expansive energy live in your body? Where are you imagining drawing the tone from? We talked about in your lesson, Joyce DiDonato said in a Masterclass once that you should draw the sound from 6 feet beneath your feet, like a well or a tree, the roots of a tree drawing up water. Right? Something that makes you feel the energy lower. You tend to keep things up here. And if I had a nickel for every time I said that to an oboist, including myself, I'd be wealthy. We all do that. Probably many wind players in general. Sometimes I feel like it's notorious among the oboe community because of the nature of our instrument, because we play with so much resistance right at the point of vibration, that we unconsciously meet that with a lot of up energy. So you have to condition yourself to feel the distance. It takes a lot of courage to feel the distance between that point of vibration and the depth of the support. There should be a huge, an infinite, a cosmic amount of space there. So that's the first thing I want to help you with. So what I'd like to do is, let's have everybody stand up actually. It's going to be used, so you can put your elbow down for a second. Okay? A lot of different ways to talk about support and breath. Some might be more useful than others. Many of them are probably helpful. What has helped me is feeling it in this particular way. What I like to do is put one of my hands on my abdomen, kind of right where my belly button is. And we want to ultimately feel the expansion all the way around to the back. And if you need whatever I'm going to share with you today to be reinforced, I highly suggest you watch videos of classical vocalists teaching breath, or just singing and observing how they use their body. Because as I say to a lot of my students, with singers, there's no middleman, it's just their body. So they really have to figure out how to use it efficiently and healthily. We can kind of get away with not doing that, but we should, okay? So we're going to put one hand on our abdomen, like this, and we're going to take a breath in, and I want to take it in for the purpose of this exercise with some resistance. So I usually do a kind of a PF sort of syllable. So we're going to create some resistance so that the breath comes in slowly, and I want you to feel the expansion of your abdomen as you breathe. It should actually move your hand. I'll do it from the side so you can observe. Right? So now my hand is farther away from my body. So can you give that a try, everybody, all at the same time? Yep. This isn't, you don't have to put a hand here. I just find it helpful to kind of focus things for me. So, put your hand here, and we're going to take that PF breath in together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so now, the breath has to have energy in it, right? The intake of the breath has to feel deep and energetic. So yours felt a little wimpy, right? Can you get a little bit more power in there? Let's try that again. Yeah, you want to really feel your hand move as you take that breath in, so you want to put a lot of resistance. You do it once on your own.
Just too fast.
Yeah, can you slow it down by causing an even smaller aperture for the intake of the breath? Yes, good. Go ahead, try again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, put your finger sort of underneath. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Okay, it's all right. A lot of times when I introduce this to people who have not explored this much at all, it feels a little weird at first. Have you ever tried to breathe like this before? Have you ever worked on this kind of breathing?
Like in terms of expanding my
Yeah, in terms of really feeling the abdominal region sort of expand outward to draw the breath all the way to the lowest point of the lungs. Have you done that?
I do like a lower syllable, but I think that doing on the syllable probably translates better to the kind of...
Excellent. So keep doing a little bit of this, all of you, but the next step is maybe in a way even more important. Certainly with the oboe, and I imagine most instruments that have at least a little bit of resistance. What you have to do now is what happens when you blow out. This is the real key. Because if you take a breath in a good location in your body, that's all well and good. But if the second you start blowing, everything goes back up here. And all that, which we do as oboe players, right, then it's all for naught. So what happens is that the key to support is maintaining the expansion in that location in the body as you're blowing out. So the way I do that is then I switch to a TS syllable. So I go like this. And you keep inviting it. You should be able to do that for a long time, especially as an oboist, right? So the key is to maintain that expansion as you're blowing out, and to also, you saw me moving around in kind of a weird way. Why was I doing that? Why was I moving around like that?
So that you don't feel tension when you do that, because in real life.
Exactly, because there's this interplay going on in our body. Very much like there is, like, for example, in a ballet. You guys can sit down. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. But there's this interplay going on in our body between strength or power and freedom and fluidity. It's a balance, right? They have to work with one another, right? So it's very easy if we're trying to work on getting that strength and power for other parts of our body to then sort of unconsciously join in that and sort of tighten up or tense up. So I really want to feel that this is the only part of my body that really is engaged in that way. Everything else should feel flexible, like a willow tree, not like an oak tree, right? So I want you to try that now, and we're going to move on in a quick second. We have other stuff to work on. We don't need to spend all day on this. But I want you to try the intake of breath and then the slow release. Keep one hand here to feel that maintained expansion, and then move around a little bit while you're doing it. You can walk around, you can move your arms, you can keep one hand here if that's helpful to you, so you can feel that interplay between strength and freedom. Okay? So, good. And then, yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. That's yes, exactly. We look like those windsock puppets. That's right. Exactly. So that's the right idea. Sometimes it helps. I know one thing singers do is they'll tie a belt or a sash around their midsection while they're practicing, so they can keep feeling their support engaging against that article of clothing, right? Sometimes I do with my students, if they're comfortable, I'll take a water bottle or something and I'll just hold it and I'll sort of push it gently up against their abdomen, and then they can kind of lean against it and they can feel the root of their air coming from there. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. But I think this is going to really help you because you're already doing so many things well, but if you really learn how to use this lower part of your body and get a little more strength from there, it's just going to make everything even easier, even more effortless, and it's going to give you a lot more of a color palette to work with. Because your sound does tend to stay in a very beautiful, but in a, I'd say we're missing 30% of the dynamic spectrum on either side. Okay? So, now, we can combine what we were just doing with the next thing I want to help you with. The thing that I most felt was not up to the level of everything else you were doing in your performance was note endings. Do you agree? Is that something you're aware of that you'd like to refine in your own playing?
Yes.
Excellent. How do we do that? How do we work on note endings? Well, there's several different ways, and honestly, when I ask most students or teachers this, the first thing they say is long tones. And long tones are great, for sure. There's a lot of wonderful things, but there's an even more efficient way to work on note endings on the oboe. Do you know what it might be? What's even more efficient than doing a long tone on the oboe? On the reed alone. Why is that more efficient?
Because you're removing variables, so you can just work on just the air and the articulation when you're on the short spacing. So all this can get distracted.
That is very true. And in addition to that, the reed is actually less forgiving. Right? Since there's so much less material actually vibrating, then it's much more prone to change based on subtle variations of airspeed, embouchure position, and all of that. The oboe provides a general pitch for you. So there's a little bit less sort of flexibility, but on the reed alone, a tiny change in position will cause a massive pitch change. So practicing finishing a note and maintaining the integrity of the intonation on the reed alone is extremely efficient, because if you can do it on the reed alone, it's about 100 times easier to do on the oboe. Okay? So I'm going to do a quick little thing in reed alone exercises. There's a lot of different approaches to reed alone exercises, but what I like to do is basically encapsulate the range of the oboe in a fourth on the reed, from A flat up to D flat. So I'm just going to pop out a quick A flat here. And it's good when you're doing these sorts of exercises to have a piano, a tuner handy, just to make sure you're being very clear with the intonation and really picky and precise about it. So, just to show you all what I do on the reed alone is I play from A flat up to D flat and back down to A flat. And then you want to work on sustaining that last note, or whatever note you choose to do on the reed alone, all the way from your fullest dynamic to silence. So let's try that. Why don't we do that for right now? What I would consider a more sort of neutral position, a B flat, which is kind of correlates with our middle-ish register on the oboe. So why don't you play? Yep. Good. And I'm going to sustain a B flat major chord. Right? I wanted another 10 seconds at least. Okay, good. So, now remember, I said we could combine what we were just working on. So I want to see if you can also bring in a little bit of this awareness of the sort of breath we were doing. The key to finishing all the way to silence on the reed alone or the oboe is to actually understand that the softer you get, the more you have to project. It's slightly counterintuitive. I was describing it to Will in his lesson as if I wanted to show you a gemstone, and I'm over here and you're over there, what would I have to do to show you a beautiful little gemstone? I'd have to bring it to you, right? So we have to do that with our sound. The softer we get, the more we have to place the tone in the most forward placement we can. And what you're doing to help, stop the note is stifling the vibrations of the reed too much, and that's why it cuts out. So try to keep blowing into the decrescendo and imagine the tone traveling all the way to the back of the chapel and beyond as a decrescendo. So, can you get louder before you start diminuendoing? Can you travel a greater distance? That's the next step for you. vibrate? Good, keep blowing. So there you go. Now, as oboists, we have to be aware of the fact that there is a component of the reed as well. Your reed has to be able to do this too. So you have to be a diagnostician to be a great oboist, or to be a great musician, period, right? Because you have to be able to know when something is an insufficiency on your part versus when it's the equipment not working as well as it needs to. So perhaps you might be coming up against the ceiling of what that reed can allow you to do. So you have to become adept at being able to analyze, hey, this reed doesn't have enough finish to it or something. The very tip of the tip has a little too much material, and so I can't play beneath a piano or a pianissimo with great consistency and accuracy. Do you have a sense of that right now? If you had to tell me a percentage of the reed causing you to not be able to finish all the way versus something you're doing, what would you say that relationship is?
I definitely think it is both.
Okay.
I used to I think care more on this is all over the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And once my reeds started getting lighter, and then my low notes still weren't coming out 100%, I was like, maybe I should take some responsibility for this.
Absolutely.
But I do think that I spoke about this yesterday, that the tip of my tip would be more timing, because I think the sound just comes in all at once. And
right. And the best way to test it as an oboist at the reed desk is to crow pianissimo, right? Is to crow as softly as you can and really put a microscope on when does the reed start vibrating? How much airspeed do I make before it starts to vibrate? I want my reeds to peep. Like Richard Williams once told me, if I'm holding them out of the open window of a moving car. Right? So really, they should start vibrating pretty immediately the second. This one starts pretty quickly, but even for me, I'd say it's about, I come in at maybe triple or double piano, and I want it to come in at quadruple piano. So I'd say there's about 5-10% missing of that immediacy on even this reed. Try it on yours to give me a really soft crow, and then gradually increase your airspeed. Yes. So that reed has a little bit of the issue of it comes in a little bit late, and then when it does, it sort of explodes a little bit. So that is exactly what you just said. That's an issue of finish on the tip of the reed a little bit. Wow, I hope that's nothing bad. So we are unfortunately out of time, but what I would let me just do one more minute, because I want you to try what we're just doing in context. Let's use that middle material in the first etude you play. This beautiful. Is that wind? Okay. I think we're okay. So I want you to try this, and here we go. This is a good note. I want you to, one thing I do to help make myself practicing finishing notes, besides long tones on the reed alone and on the oboe, is I'll play something I'm working on, and anytime you get to the end of a phrase or a note that you have to sustain, I'll hold it much longer than what's actually asked for in the music. And I'll just treat every single phrase ending or sustained note as another opportunity to sort of develop that ability to finish to completion and to silence. So try that. Just play these first few measures, and I want you to see if you can finish that F sharp. Finish than you were doing before already. What did you change? Try to verbalize. Pretend like I am your student and you have to tell me what you did. Explain it to me.
I think you're definitely right that I've just been using my jaw to do any sort of taper or I think it's not going 3,000% flat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the metaphor of reaching out also helped me make sure I was literally keeping my corners in, reaching out so that I wasn't chomping down.
Exactly. And we do tend to, as oboe players, be a little, maybe unconsciously or consciously, embouchure-oriented in our focus about things. We talk a lot, we think a lot about what our embouchure is doing. But the embouchure is the wingman or wingwoman to the air, right? The air is really needs to be the primary source of control. I don't love the word control, but you know what I mean. And the embouchure should only act in support of what the air's needs are. But we tend to think of that hierarchy as the opposite, especially when it comes to stuff like note endings. So already, just by being a little more conscientious about what your air is doing, where you're projecting it, where you're aiming it, how you're sustaining it, your embouchure therefore had to do less work. Right? It couldn't actually come in and control as much. It needed to get out of the way of the air a little bit more, and you had a little more finish that time. So just bring attention to that in your practicing, because if you can really get your note endings to be up at the level of so many of the other things you're doing in this, it's just going to be magical. Okay? Thank you, Eli. So take your time, get your reed vibrating and feeling how you want it to be, and then when you are ready, I want you to tell everybody exactly what you're going to play. Remember what we talked about. Already that had a little more glow in the finish. We all have a tendency, I'll take this as a quick moment to say something about warm-ups, reed tests, noodles, whatever you want to call it. Remember, on a more practical level, and of course I am completely all about the notion that this is not an ego-based craft that we're doing. Yet nonetheless, when you're showing up at a gig to sub for the first time, or it's your first day at a new job, or you're getting together with a new group for the first time, whatever it may be, from the very first notes you play, people are already making assessments, right? So you want your playing to display ebullience, confidence, beauty, joy, virtuosity, right? So remember that. And that, once again, it's the same thing whether you're on your own or around other people. You want to always make sure you're playing as if you're projecting your artistic will outward, okay? And then on a level that is a little bit more, to me, important than that practical level, every time you play your instrument, no matter what you're doing, you are building in habits, right? You're creating muscle memory, you're creating imagination memory, you're defining your voice every time you play, whether you're testing the reed or playing a concerto in front of an orchestra. It doesn't matter what the context is. So always infuse your playing with the most incredible flavors you possibly can.
So I'm going to be playing orchestral excerpts from Stravinsky's Pulcinella Suite. I'll be starting with the second movement, the Serenata.
Would you like to play the three excerpts all?
Yeah, I can do that.
Let's do that, because then it's a little bit more like what it would be in an audition context. Okay? So you're going to play the Serenata, the Gavotte, the Variation?
Yeah.
Excellent. great delicacy, great, just a really beautiful tone. Intonation generally is quite good. I hear a lot of your ideas. It sounds like you are familiar with these excerpts and how they kind of go. There's a way excerpts go, but we also need to find room to bring something fresh and flavorful too. So there's two main things that I hear that I think right away are going to help bring these even to the next level. One is the quality of the legato, particularly with regards to the dynamics, because you are doing some nice shaping, but within that shaping, sometimes some notes are popping out and other notes are sort of disappearing. I'm not hearing a fundamental equality of resonance and color of the tone underneath the shaping. So it comes across a little bit jarring sometimes. The second thing is rhythmic integrity, particularly with regards to the serenata. I thought your rhythmic integrity was pretty good in the Gavon variation. Your tempo at the start of the variation was a little bit, it didn't feel like you really had it clarified before you started, and so it kind of came into the picture eventually. But the serenata was where the rhythm felt the most inconsistent to me, particularly with regards to what feature?
The 16th.
The dotted rhythms, yeah, the dotted rhythms. And that is definitely one of the things we're going to be listening for in an audition context, is both the consistency of the dotted rhythms and the nature, the character of the dotted rhythm. What do you think I mean when I say the character of the dotted rhythm? Do you think rhythm itself has a character to it?
Yeah, I think like how you play, like how long you give the 16th note and like what emphasis you give it, gives it a certain character, and it should probably be consistent throughout.
Absolutely. So, one way to think of it is sort of a spectrum of a more held 16th note, elongated 16th note, versus a more snappy sort of dotted rhythm, and where you want to fall on that spectrum, right? And I've heard this played many different ways. I've heard people really, so two very different approaches to the length of that 16th note and the nature of the dot. So you have to have a clarity of vision of what you want that to be. Do you want it to be more emphasizing the dance-like nature of this, or more emphasizing the song-like nature, right? Everything we play is some combination of singing and dancing. So, one of the things we get to do as an artist is decide which of those two things takes precedence, if one does at all. Maybe they're equal. But either way, if you want it to be a little bit more dance-like, maybe you can make that dotted rhythm a little snappier. If you want it to be a little bit more song-like, maybe you can hold it a tiny bit more elongated and make it feel a little bit more melancholy and lugubrious. So what's your thought about the dotted rhythm? Are you attracted to one of those characters a little more than the other?
I tend to think of it more snappy, but not too,
yeah.
It still should be a 16.
We don't want it to be flippant.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. That's good. So, just for the sake of an exercise, let's use a metronome. I want to see. Now, what helps me when I play this excerpt is to really hear what's going on underneath you. What is going on underneath you?
It's like,
yes. It really creates that feeling of a procession kind of going on. You have to really hear that and feel that internally. And one of the ways you can help yourself do that, besides listening to recordings a lot and playing along with recordings, is working with a metronome. And I've met a lot of teachers out there that the metronome is pretty much always on for them, and they believe it's a tool that is to be used pretty perpetually. I tend to use it a little more sparingly myself, but once in a while, and in the case of both of your lessons, it has proved to be very fruitful. So I'm going to pull up my metronome here. Okay, so what's your tempo?
Maybe around 50.
So we're going to go, let's put it at 150. There we go. That seems maybe a hair fast.
Okay.
Let's just try it at like 142 for right now. And if we don't like it, we can change it. Okay, that's close enough. Let's just take that much. That's a perfect little microcosm of the whole excerpt in a way. How many phrases do you perceive this excerpt as containing? How many macro phrases?
Like maybe 4.
Could be. I tend to think of it as 3.
Okay.
What you just played being phrase number 1, and then these 2 measures being number 2, and then basically 9 to the end is sort of an elongated phrase.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it. So this first phrase is a perfect little way for us to kind of build in this character and the rhythm we're looking for. What did you discover, if anything, when playing it with a metronome? Did you discover any tendencies you have? Were there moments where you wanted to slow down or move ahead and the metronome prevented you from being able to do that?
I think maybe sometimes I spend a bit too much time in the OC.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe start the next
Wallowing in the beauty of the
Yeah.
Lord. Exactly. Good. I still think this is probably a fine tempo. I tend to like it just a hair slower. Are you willing to try that?
Yeah, sure.
Just 136. Let's do it one more time. Now, for me, you have much greater consistency in the nature of the dominant rhythm, and I would say that's definitely on the snappier side. Just as an experiment, and to sort of enhance your own musical flexibility, let's try it with a little bit more of a held approach to that rhythm. That changes the overall atmosphere when you play this. When you go that slightly slower and a little more held in the pulse.
Yeah, I would say it's more like more singing, involving like a little bit more in a sense.
Yeah, it definitely comes across a little bit more melancholy, right? It changes sort of the nature of the procession slightly, right? It's a little bit. There's a little more weight to it. There's a little more sadness. It's not quite as regal in a way or something. So I really like to think of rhythmic character in that way. How is somebody moving? What kind of person, if it is a person at all? What do they look like? What time period is it? What is the atmosphere? You know, what time of day is it? I really like to flesh out those details so whenever I play something, that clarity of vision comes across to the listener. Okay, now, next step. What I'm hearing in terms of your microphrasing, how many microphrases do you think that first macro phrase has? 3, yeah. Pretty obviously. And where would you say that the peak of each of those 3 microphrases is?
Like the 30.
I totally agree with you. However, that's not what you're playing. You're going, you're going to beat 2 in each measure. What that does is it makes those microphrases feel a little top-heavy to me. So it feels like the latter half of each of those microphrases is sort of dying on the vine. So can you try it again with the metronome? And this time, I want you to go all the way to beat 3. How does that change that to you? It feels more fulfilling somehow, right? Really rounds it out. Now, what's the next level of phrasing we want to have? We have the micro phrases beautifully, but how do we make the macro phrase more interesting? Should all three of those microphrases have the same color, dynamic, start, and or climax? Or should we find some way to give those three an arc?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think in terms of a larger arc? Where do you think the highest point of all three of those measures should be?
Probably the second measure.
Okay, good. Try that then. Show that more, because right now that's not coming across. Very good. The only thing I'd say is on your third statement, you kind of whipped the tone out. You went like that. Can you keep the sotto voce? Just to the, only give a little bit of to the third beat, but don't let the tone whip out prior to that, because the whole power of being sotto voce on that third measure got a little bit sort of, the rug got pulled out under it. It wasn't as magical as it could have been. Mm-hmm. More. A little bit. Good. Now, what happened in your body?
When that's scrunched
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially when you were playing what? Exactly. So try for me. Now, if I were practicing, what I would do then is I would first notice that. I would say, I really like what I just did, but I didn't like the way I accomplished it. Mm-hmm. I was talking to, it was you in your lesson today about, I think we have a tendency to focus a lot on practicing being a way to make things better, more beautiful, more interesting, more precise, whatever way it may be. But practicing should also be, and sometimes maybe we need to even emphasize this, not necessarily about playing something, better, the result, but actually executing it more effortlessly. Right? Practicing, okay, I liked what I did, but I noticed that when I got soft, I got a little tighter. Do I need to be tight? Can I remain open? Can I keep my body in a healthier position and achieve that result? And what you'll often discover is that it's even better when you have that body awareness. So, what exercise could you do right now to help yourself figure out how to find what it's like to play softly with freedom and ease? Think of an exercise you could do.
I'm just going to try that.
Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll take whatever I'm playing, I'll take the key area of it, and then I'll just play a scalar passage, for example, in that key. So maybe just try, I'm sure my reed's totally dry now. Just noodle around in C minor very softly and just feel your body, maybe move around a little bit, see where tension wants to build up. Any discoveries? What did you pay attention to? What did you perceive?
I think sometimes going some of those half steps, I really wanted to kind of get the most out of it, but then that kind of made me tense up a bit.
Yeah, and it's just a little bit. I mean, you play generally pretty freely. Now, I encourage you to move around a little when you played, and you didn't move much. And it's not that I necessarily believe that moving more or less is correct or incorrect. It's more about whether or not you have the flexibility to change something in the foundation of your play. Are you too attached to keeping your frame in one position? Can you let go of that attachment a little bit, if for no other reason than just to not be addicted to that? So try the same thing again, and this time I really want to see you move around a little bit. Be a little more fearless about it. You can go do some side to side. I was talking, this is for the clarinets. I know that you hooted a lot, at least I've heard secondhand. And Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that he sometimes has his students play scales and do these massive circles while they're playing the scale. And I assume, if that's true, that it's because you're trying to, let go of unnecessary tension in your frame through movement. So this is going to be a similar sort of exercise, but maybe a less extreme version. Just a little bit of side to side. Feel the flexibility in your arms, your shoulders, your hips, your knees. All the joints in your body should not feel locked up. Is there particular moments where you feel the tension want to come in a little bit more than others, like perhaps either when you go up into the higher register or when you try to get even softer? Do you feel that clenching of energy?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to work out in the playing. That's exactly what we want to have awareness of, and that's exactly what we want to lose our attachment to, because it is not necessary. You can always be free, you can always be flexible, you can always be open. Soft, loud, high, low, doesn't matter. It's a false belief that we get ingrained in us from 6th grade, right? And a lot of what studying oboe in college is about is unpacking the bad habits we picked up in those earlier years. Now, try it in context. I want you to do those opening 3 measures again and go on, because we're going to do the same thing here when we echo. And I want you to really maintain this beautiful phrasing, the consistency of the dotted rhythm, but add to it this time a greater degree of awareness of what you're doing at the softer dynamics. And if you have to use movement in those moments to break up tension, do so. Good. I like this tempo personally. I think it's a very lovely tempo. You can go a little faster if you want to, but I think that works well. What did you discover that time?
Yeah, I felt a lot easier.
Mm-hmm. Sounded easier.
Yeah.
And did you notice whether you were playing soft or loud, I was going like that.
Yeah.
And it's doubly important when we're playing soft. We swallow up our tones when we play soft. It's completely unconscious. We all do it, and it's the opposite of what we need to do. I remember sitting next to Richard Woodhams at the Aspen Music Festival and hearing him play, and it was like so soft. I couldn't believe how soft it was. And then I'd go sit out in the audience, and it was so soft, but right in my ear. Somehow he could play triple piano, and yet it still reached all the way to the back of the hall. And that is just this kind of imaginative quality of projecting our sound, which then I think allows us to use our air and place the tone in a resonating space that allows it to travel at any dynamic. So I encourage you to keep working on that. Can you try, as our last little thing before we wrap up, now playing this excerpt for us without the metronome, but see if you can maintain that beautiful rhythmic integrity and that consistency of the dotted rhythm. tendency seems to be to slow down just a little bit, and for the dotted rhythm to get a little bit lazier as it goes. So just keeping that. Maybe you want to practice hearing just little beat 2. So you can feel the impulse of beat 2, which then gives that dotted rhythm the energy it needs to keep things sort of moving and stately and processional and not get stagnant.
Yeah.
But that was beautiful. Thank you, Will. Great job. Peter. Hello. So same thing, take your time, get ready, get comfortable, and then when you are ready, let us know what you'd like to play.
All right.
What are they called?
Okay, so we have the Homage to Rachmaninoff, which is subtitled Walpurgis Nacht, and then the Homage to Stravinsky, which is Capriccio Serioso.
Excellent. difficult. I'm not super familiar with them. So I don't necessarily have a lot to offer you in terms of what you might want to do a little bit more with them from an artistic standpoint. I think they're pretty darn convincing already. But I was paying attention to the process.
Yeah. I
Which
switch reads.
Well, yeah, tell me about that. What was going on with the read?
Well,
Was it changing as you were playing?
it was. It
Yeah.
got very close, very fast.
Yeah. Now, you managed to navigate it in a way,
That's very good.
you managed to navigate it in a way that probably most people wouldn't have been aware of any issue, which is a testament to your ability to stay in the flow even when your equipment is fighting you, which is so necessary for all of us. I want to say particularly oboe players just because reeds are such an ever-changing thing for us. So you handled that brilliantly and beautifully. How did it manifest, do you think, in terms of things that were becoming challenging as you were playing?
I definitely started getting tension, and then that made basically everything worse. But I felt like I was trying to fight to get it to sound accurate, and then it lost a bit of the character that I was trying to go for, especially towards the end. But
yeah, and how about in terms of what the reed was allowing you color-wise or tonally? What did you discover?
it was somewhat strident and small, I'd say.
Yeah, it kind of got both more spread and more kind of limited as it went on, which was interesting. Why don't you play a little bit of some of
I'd
this?
love to give it another shot.
Yeah, maybe some of the second one, since
Right.
the first one was less affected by the reed.
Yes.
It's pretty short. Just play the whole thing for us
Okay.
again.
Yeah, I'd love to. Kind of water.
It's okay. Take a moment. There's no rush. I know how uncomfortable. Keep getting it out. I know how uncomfortable it is when you're on stage in the middle of a performance and you get water and you're like, oh gosh, should I take the time to do this? And it's so quiet in here and everybody's watching you. Just do it. Just take your time. Sometimes I'll even make a little joke to the audience while I'm doing it. You know, the perils of being an oboist or something like that. But, you know, you just own the space and people will feel comfortable. They won't mind waiting. survey, okay, of the audience. Raise your hand if the change in the read had a very large effect on what you experienced as a listener. Raise your hand if the change in the read had a moderate effect on your experience as a listener. Raise your hand if the change in read had a very small effect. Raise your hand if it had no effect. So basically somewhere between no effect to small effect. I'm not, and Peter, let me make this clear, I'm not saying this to make you feel bad for feeling like you needed to switch your reads. Your own comfort is absolutely important, but it's also simultaneously important to recognize how little we tend to experience that. In fact, I think it was Alex Klein who once said, I heard this secondhand, that a lot of times when he would listen back to the recordings of his performances in the orchestra, the concerts that he was on, the reads that he liked the most, he didn't like the recording as much as the ones on the lesser reads. Because almost in a way, when you're playing on a lesser read, it's what they call the rock in the camel's ear, which is this old saying that's like a benevolent distraction, right? It's like you're working with dealing with the read, which is somehow then making you bring more sort of emotional energy or artistic energy because you're working through this fight a little bit. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting we go out of our way to try to play on lesser reads to invite that. I'm just saying never underestimate how much of a less effect your comfort with the read is going to have to the listener's experience. And you better remind yourself of that, because I've had many performances where, right when I started, I was like, oh wow, this read does not feel like what I thought it did just a second ago backstage, or it changes while I'm performing and it starts to get a really brittle tone, or the response gets funny or something. That kind of stuff is going to happen a lot. And you have to learn how to trust your voice and trust your playing and not let it impact you at all. And I guarantee you, the vast majority of the time when you hear the recording afterwards, it's going to sound much less problematic than it felt while you were in the moment. That's been my experience, at least, and I'm sure others can attest to that. Now, in terms of, I'm just going to do a quick time check here. Good. In terms of your playing and what we can do to take it even to the next level, and like I said, I don't believe there's much I need to tell you in terms of what to do with this music. You have a very clear vision, and you're playing it very convincingly. But I'm noticing some things in the technique that I think you can bring attention to and work on that's going to help you even bring this to a higher level. The first thing I notice is the noisiness of the mechanics of your playing. Now, granted, this music is very active, and having a little bit of that percussive component in the key work and the mechanics is probably unavoidable to a certain degree, and maybe even, some might say, at some points even welcome in a certain way. It adds a sort of dynamism and dimensionality to it. But where's the line between that key noise being indicative of something artistically tasteful versus it being indicative of your technique having a certain degree of efficiency? That's what I want to explore. So let's take a passage. There was one particular part I noticed where you go down to the low register. Is this it? That, yes. Oh, look, and it's even pianissimo. So we're asking for a color. He's asking for a color here that is very whispery and very shadowy, and I'm getting something very percussive. So let's try playing it slowly to start. You can just go right on it. And I want you to play it with absolutely nothing but pure tone. I don't want to hear anything mechanical at all. No key noise. And I would go even slower. Even slower. I've noticed that with a lot of students I work with. I ask them to play something slower for me. And I'm thinking, and they're like, no. I want it really slow, because we got to put a microscope on what you're doing to really figure out how do we bring it to the next level. did you discover when you were playing it, particularly the first time when you played it very softly, in your effort to keep the key noise minimal? How did you feel in terms of freedom and ease?
I think I backed off my support a little bit when I was thinking about that.
Yeah, you lost the projection of the sound.
Yeah.
What about in terms of just your frame physically? Did it feel like it had the potential for fluidity and freedom, or did you feel a little bit straitjacketed by the need to be quiet in the fingers?
I think I felt pretty relaxed.
Okay, good. Good. That's wonderful. And, sometimes what I perceive is obviously not going to be exactly what you're feeling. But from my end, it felt to me like you got a little bit, you can actually, and this is what Will and I were working on in his lesson today, you can actually move away from the keys and still play silently. You don't need to keep, now, a lot of oboists and probably other wind players will say keep your fingers close to the keys. That's how you develop good, healthy technique. That is a truth, but I don't think it's the whole truth. If you're keeping your fingers close to the keys through tightness and tension, then it's no good. So this is a moment, I think, for us to try a little bit of see an enemy hand. You've probably never heard of that.
No, but I can imagine.
Yeah, so we're actually going to, let's just start with a scalar figure. Move your fingers away from the keys just for this exercise to feel the fluidity of your technique so it's not so angular. Exactly. Now, it's good. I know you want that resolution. Nice. Very good. Already you made a quick shift there. Now, next thing I notice is that we're on that line again between a swallowed up tone versus a soft tone. That sounds swallowed up to me. Can you find the resonance in that smaller space through projection? Good. Fingers, see an enemy. There you go. So there's you have a little bit of an attachment of keeping some of your fingers. You have to be really fearless. You should be able to take your fingers away from the keys completely and still feel like you have control, right? So this exercise is just teaching you how to cultivate that fluidity. Now try the figure as written. Fluidity. Good. Generally speaking, you were actually moving more than you did the previous time, and yet it was still quieter. Because the way you were making contact with the keys had a little more elegance to it, had a little bit more affettuoso energy and a little bit less slappy. Try it a little faster now. See if you can maintain that. Good. And try to think about keeping the tone a little bit more forward placed in the cone, a little bit less grip on the reed so that you don't get those notes that want to cut out when you're playing softer. One more time. I'm not hearing so much of the mechanics of the instrument anymore, and therefore it feels like there's less competing for my awareness and my attention. Try it a little faster. There was and there was a slight in your effort to keep the quietude here, there was a slight overgrip of the reed happening. Try one more time with as much freedom as you had in the previous version. And you'll notice it tends to be certain fingers that I think it's either your second finger or your ring finger. Yeah, those tend to get a little bit slappier. So this is, once again, folks, this is what practicing is. We're putting a microscope on everything we're doing with a non-judgmental and loving energy. We're having joy in the process, and we're leaving no stone unturned. If you can foster that every day in your practicing, I think that's when you can really start unlocking the artist that already resides within you, that's already fully realized. Once you shed away those layers of insecurity or lack of technique that prevent it from being present at all times. We have 4 minutes. Thank you so much. Fantastic. I wanted to save 5 to 10 minutes at the end if there were any questions. So we have maybe time for 1 or 2 quick questions. I see a hand up in the back. Is that Quincy? Hi.
I have a quick question. It was when Will was playing, you were always playing forward.
Yes.
I didn't know if that was more pertaining to the sound or just the consistency of the airflow, because I was wondering if it could be an expressive tool to like the sound and not have it pushing forward. And if that could be said in all of your gestures, just pertaining to the full air, not necessarily projection of the sound.
Yes, that's an excellent question. So Quincy wants to know if my forward gesturing while Will was playing Pulcinella had to do more with sort of projection or maintaining sort of the integrity, tautness, and directionality of the airflow. And I would say really both. In terms of whether or not there's a time for the tone to be soft and not forward moving or forward placed, there might be. I find that to be pretty rare. Even if I'm playing something that is meant to be, like, for example, the opening of the Due to You Sonata, I think is a good example of this. There's, it's the window. There, in the opening of the Due to You, we almost want this kind of icy quality that doesn't necessarily have our more kind of standard or typical sense of directional beauty, right? We just want something that's almost kind of static. But even to achieve that, you still have to have movement and direction just to maintain the equality of the resonance and color of the tone. If you let that get stagnant, in my experience, then you start to suffer. The tone starts to disappear or fight you or get swallowed up. So for me, even just maintaining equalness takes a certain amount of constant forward intentionality in my playing. So in a way, I think there's almost really never a time, but I would say for most of us, most of the time, we have a tendency when we're playing soft to not take care of the projection. So I think it's important right now at this stage in your development to be very mindful of that. Okay. What else? Anything? We have time for maybe one more quick question. Yes, Abby?
Why is the PH, the audible sound on the inhale when we're doing exercises with Eli?
Oh, the breathing in sound?
Yeah.
PF. I don't know if PF is really accurate. That's the closest syllable I can think of. But that's the only way I can take an intake of air without the aid of some sort of straw or something, just on my own, and create enough resistance in it that I can draw it in slowly. Now, obviously, you're not going to do that in context. You're not going to go, every time you're about to play. So this is only useful, for me at least, with this exercise, to draw attention to where I'm drawing the air to in my body and how I'm feeling the expansion of it in this lower part of my torso. So that syllable I find to be very useful for me to be able to really cultivate that feeling. Now, in context, you have to do it quickly, right? You have to take a breath quickly, but it should still feel like that same kind of expansion just sped up. Okay? Well, I think that's probably all we have time for. Thank you all for coming. It was a pleasure.